during that kind of moment of despair, I had only one thing to turn to, which was video games. What if I start making video games with intention to help other people? What kind of power can I unlock there?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast. Today, it's super cool where I, your host, Dr. Jim Hoven, get a chance to visit with someone who's changing people's lives on screen. What do I mean by that? Today, we have a video game developer, something that is really important to a lot of people, not only here locally, but around the globe. I have with me Mr. Z Yang, and he's with Serenity Forge. We're going to talk about his journey, how he got into this, his creative streak, what works, what he's found that doesn't work. This is going to be a really cool episode. So if you're watching this, we don't do all of our sessions video, but this one was just going to work best by video. So you'll be able to share this, listen to it again, and hopefully it'll give you some inspiration to follow your dreams and follow your path as well. So without any more delay, I want to welcome Z to the show. Z, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
Absolutely. So, hey, tell me, how did you first get started into video game development? Were you a gamer yourself and you just really found passion into it, or where did this thing grow from to where now you do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of started off with a big question there. I mean, kind of how I got started here. If you don't mind, I'd love to kind of tell you a little short story about kind of how our business got started and how I got the inspiration.
Absolutely.
And basically, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. When I was a kid, I was a nerd, this geek that is going through middle school, high school, playing tons of video games, didn't have a lot of friends, didn't do so well in school. And I was just kind of this weird outcast that played games a lot. And what happened was that, while I was doing that, I kind of really went a little too hard, as you could say, when it comes to playing video games. Maybe went a little sideways when it comes to health. And basically what happened was in my first year of college, it was actually just a couple months into school, I ended up having a really serious illness. I went to the hospital and I was told I only had 3 hours left to live. Due to this very serious illness. And basically what happened is that I had a blood issue that they couldn't identify, and that it was very serious. And I was put on all sorts of medication. I was getting transfusions and eventually put on chemo, just to try to survive. And in my first year of college, I was sent home. I was told that, you can't really do anything anymore. You have to stay in the hospital. I ended up being hospitalized for 2 years after that. And those were some of the most difficult, moments of my life. Basically, all of the friends and family that I had before I went in disappeared. People would wonder, oh, is he still alive? I think he's like dying in the hospital or something. That's, everyone would talk about that. And during that kind of moment of despair, I had only one thing to turn to, which was video games. So I started playing all sorts of games. I played single player games that made me feel like a hero. I'm going out there saving the world. That made me feel good about myself. I played multiplayer games that are, games like World of Warcraft or League of Legends or Minecraft. I was able to meet people online, make new friends from all over the world. And some of these friends didn't even speak English, but they were checking in with me every day to see, have I taken my medicine? Have I gotten the proper amount of rest? And eventually I met some of the world's best hematologists through my friends who were medical researchers online, who just genuinely cared about me and made the intro. And these medical researchers ended up saving my life, essentially. So about 2 years after treatment, I started finally getting better, and I was able to start school again at CU Boulder here in Colorado. But my first year of school, I thought to myself, games like World of Warcraft and League of Legends, these games were not really made to help me. But in the end, they saved my life. What if I start making video games with intention to help other people? What kind of power can I unlock there? So that's when I decided to, give making video games a shot and actually make sure that I inject value and actually create games with intention of helping others.
That is such a cool story. I'm so glad you gave the backstory of, because I wanted to get into the types of games that you create, because those are only limited by imagination, but the health challenges and where this led to. I was taking down some notes while you were talking, and one thing that hit me was, two parts. So the first question, I'll ask them one at a time. The first question is, You mentioned that you didn't do so well in school, that you were all about gaming, you were a kind of isolated kid, not a lot of friends, this and that. At the end of the day, you were really good at games. And so I've heard it said by one of my mentors that we all have geniuses, and that if you can find what motivates someone into what I would call their key values, the things that really push their buttons, you'll see their genius come out. And so while you weren't doing necessarily academically well, or however society might define successful at that age, you were excellent at something, and you might have taken it a little too far, but you were excellent so that you found your genius. Do you subscribe to that kind of philosophy that everyone is a genius in their own way if they can find their own flow?
This is a really interesting way to look at it. I look at it in a very similar way, but maybe a slightly different coat of paint here. And a lot of what I'm inspired by is actually when I was in my final year of college, I had a very lucky experience to be working with the Federal Reserve. I was an intern there, and I actually had a chance to have lunch with the then chairman of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, Dr. Ben Bernanke. Kind of spent some time to kind of hang out with the kids and see what the youth is all about. And I decided to kind of ask him a question. And I asked him, like, how do you really define success in life? And like how would you someone like you of all people define success in your life? And he said that like looking back at his life, a lot of what he went through versus a lot of kind of what the world goes through. He looks at it very, very holistically. A lot of people in the world are very unfortunate if you think about it. People who are in Africa or rural China who just, you have to walk 4 hours every day just to get water to feed your family, to make sure your kids survive. Like there's a lot of very unfortunate people out there in the world. He said that if you are one of the lucky few, the very small amount of people that is lucky enough to be able to choose what you want to do in life, as opposed to be forced into what you have to do to survive, then that's how you really make a difference. It's by actually pursuing what you are able in life, what you're capable of, and actually taking a stab at it. He said that when he was a kid, when he was working at fast food joints, he would spend his extra time playing with spreadsheets and trying to find trends in the market, just because that's what he was passionate for, and eventually he turned it into a career. And really, upon hearing that, I was like, perfect. That's a really, really good point. I'm quitting right now and I'm going to go start a video game company, because that's what I wanted to do. I realized that that's exactly what I'm passionate for. And I wanted to make sure that the time that I had left, I'm really focusing on building the things that I love and giving back.
That is such a great answer. And I'm so glad you shared that quote. We'll call it a concept as opposed to a quote, of really understanding that if you're lucky enough to choose your destiny versus having it laid upon you, that in itself is a definition. That's the start of success, just having the choice and the options. Thank you for sharing that with me, Z. That's something that I will keep with me for the rest of my life right there, my friend. So now part two of my question is, when you looking back at it now, if you were trying to tell yourself back then when you were kind of isolated, playing games, going too far, as you say, what advice would you have given yourself, if any, that would have helped you avert the crisis of health that you ended up experiencing? Not to say that it wasn't exactly what needed to happen, because without all that, you might not be here today. So let's just take that part aside for a minute and say everything happens in perfection for the right reason at the right time. But let's just say if you could give yourself advice to have avoided that pain, is there something that you would see? Because I know that your story is probably not all that uncommon once kids, especially if they're not connected to something and other things, and this gaming life becomes just their virtual and their almost real world. There's probably some wisdom that you could share with folks from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a lot I want to share. But at the same time, I know, then me would never listen to a word of it. That's just how teenagers are. But I mean, looking at I think what I'm about to say is probably what any person would say, and I would probably argue that you would probably say it way better than I could. So I'm gonna attempt to say what I think might be helpful, which is really just, life is long, and that everything you do is actually an investment. Especially when you're a younger kid, when you're looking at your teenage years, sure, you could be spending time with your buddies, sure, you could be experimenting with drugs, sure, you could be spending time playing video games, you could be studying for your SATs. There's a lot of different things you could do, and each of those would yield different types of results. When you're a kid, you don't know what those results are. When you're older, you do know what those results are because you faced it, you saw it, but now it's too late. You don't have the chance to go back and do it again. And I think that's kind of the dilemma that every human being kind of has to face. And even in our respective ages, we're still investing in our future. We're still making choices to kind of turn our lives into a thing. And we could only guess. A 90-year-old person would be able to tell us way better what our day-to-day is like, and they would say, what you're doing right now, that's pointless. What you really should have done is this other thing, right? So I think looking back at my teenage years, really, I wish that I probably didn't spend as much time doing the things that didn't really yield the results that I wanted to see. And ultimately, what I probably wanted to see is very coincidentally actually ended up kind of closing a gap because of what ended up happening, because I went off the rails too much and I kind of created more motivations. So I don't know. I mean, you live life and you live it once, and then what you have is what you get. And I think maybe it's ultimately less about nitpicking the past, but more about kind of looking at what you have and building appreciation for the future.
That is a really, really great answer too, Z, because from my perspective, living in the moment and appreciating is one thing, but sometimes without experience, without context, it's tough to appreciate the beauty of the moment because you don't have enough behind you to understand even really what that means. So you're just, as a teenager, maybe a junior high schooler, or even high schooler, you're just trying to figure out what the moments even mean, right? And so you get caught up and hopefully as parents, maybe we can have some sort of a guiding force. My kids are all older now, but when they were younger, I wanted them to try all kinds of things, but I wanted to try to also expose them to things, even if they weren't necessarily like, ooh, this is what I want to do. I figured if I gave them some other things, that it would give them other comparatives so that now they could say, oh, apples and oranges, and I like apples better, give them a taste. So I think your point is so valid, and I think we now as adults, whether it's as uncles, aunts, parents, grandparents, whatever it might be, we can and probably should take on the mantle of being responsible to help our kids see life through a broader perspective than maybe they have. And I don't know how you feel about that, but that's just what came to me as you were sharing.
I definitely feel the same way. I have two very young kids. I have a daughter who is 3 years old, and my son is only 10 months as of right now. And basically every day I think about this type of stuff. I think about a lot of just what is actually healthy, what is actually happy, and how to not only how I would define it, but how I should shape someone to define their own versions of it, right? I feel like there's a lot of things in society where it's kind of built in a way where it's not healthy, right? Like it's not actually good for the world. Like, for example, the American dream, this idea of like, you have your gorgeous wife and two beautiful children, your golden retriever dog and your white picket fence. You go to the dinner parties and brag about, your job titles and how much money you make and, show off your car. A lot of this kind of like extrinsic type of perspective on things is not actually how I feel like people are able to healthily define their own lives, because it's not a concept that everyone subscribes to, first of all. And then secondly, it's not actually what makes people happy. I remember hearing a story many years ago where very successful investment banker, kind of you're pulling, 7 figures every couple months type of individual at Wall Street. And this is a while back when the Apple II computer first came out. He was extremely fascinated by the computer. In fact, specifically, he was fascinated by the Breakout, the game where you kind of shoot this ball back and forth and you have
Oh, I know it very well. That was the last video game I was good at, brother.
there you go. So as soon as he started playing that game, he was just completely addicted. He ended up playing that game every day, every second of his life, and eventually he quit his job. He didn't even want to go to work anymore. He just wanted to play this game. And then about a couple months after he played the game, one day he got a perfect score. He managed to actually get the highest possible score in that game, and he just played all day and every day and did nothing else, right? And then he turned to his wife, closed the computer, turned to his wife, and said, "This is the happiest day of my life. I've never been happier than this day." And this is a thing that was, this is a person who turned down a hugely successful job and went through a lot in his life to get there. And somehow this little video game in a computer managed to make him feel the greatest he's ever felt, right? And really just kind of goes to show a lot of the things that I do at Serenity Forge, and as a game designer, game creator, we think about how certain parts of the world may not be really functioning in the way that they should. Someone shouldn't only define their success based on their job title, or only define their success based on how much dollars are in their bank account. But instead, they can define success in other ways. Like, for example, maybe you master an instrument or master a craft. You can be successful as a cellist or a pianist in your own way. You don't need to be Yo-Yo Ma to be a successful cellist. You can just be happy because you are better than you were yesterday, right? You could go on adventures and explore. You can go explore the wilderness. You can maybe, come across, surprises that were really joyful and brought joy to your life. There are so many different areas that people could define success in their life, but we're not really exploiting them as much in society. And instead, we do that in video games. And that's a lot of times what we try to do with our products. We try to make sure that people are fulfilled. We look at the different dimensions of kind of humanity and try to explore, maybe send them onto a world to explore and feel the sense of wonder when they come across beautiful trees and scenery, right? Or maybe put them into an online community where they meet friends and engage and interact, whereas otherwise in the world, they're stuck in a hospital bed and they're not actually able to go out there and meet people. So a lot of times, when you're looking at video games, I think it's easy to kind of think about how games are really just toys. They're just time wasters. You're knocking bricks with birds on your phone. Maybe it's not necessarily something that's good for the world, but there's so much hidden depth behind that we haven't even started exploring yet. And that's kind of, a lot of what I care about. Sorry, that's kind of a minor tangent there, but I just wanted to put it out there that, like, I feel like that's a lot of how I see value and success in life.
I think the reason that I love that answer so much, Z, is because for anyone watching, I'm sure that they have to be surprised by, if nothing else, by your depth of philosophical context to what you do, and to know that I wrote something down as you were talking that really makes me, and I'm not a gamer, right? So I literally can't relate to much of what the gaming world is, but I can relate to what you're saying. And so here's what I wrote down: gaming with a conscience. Meaning, and not consciousness, but rather being conscientious and having conscience about our planet and human values and things that might be going on, so that it might not just be an escape for someone, but rather it could act as a beautiful, almost a session, if you will, of learning or creating or discovering something besides tearing something down, blowing something up, chopping something's head off, all the other things that definitely draw people's attention. This just sounds to me like it's got a different ethos behind it, or a different wind behind it. Can you describe more about the games that you create? Give us some examples of the specific games that you were now referring to by philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple, but I'll start by something that's kind of close to heart. Came out a few years ago. There's a game that we released called Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. And this game takes place in the Dust Bowl era in America. So basically, think about Great Gatsby, or maybe Grapes of Wrath. I think Steinbeck novels. Basically, it's kind of a lot of that. What was that inspired by? So in Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, you play as a homeless person in basically 1930s, 1920s America. And you come across a lot of different stories while you're kind of walking around in America, trying to find the next place to rest and trying to find the next, thing to do, basically. And these stories are, how would you say it? They are, I mean, they're American. They're American stories. I mean, they're and I'll kind of go into why. And as you go through the game, you come across other people who are homeless, and you share stories with them, and you bond with them, and then you get to learn about their lives. And then at the end, you die because you are a homeless person in the Dust Bowl era. You will be starving. You will be beaten by the police. You will die by the end of the game. But the idea of the game is to really show you kind of what life can be about. Like, life isn't just about again, monetary success. Life can be about the relationships that you built along the way. Life can be about finding pieces of truth in the moment to moment interactions with other people. And when we made this game, we did something really crazy, which is the game has something like 500,000 words or something. It's 500,000 words. It's gigantic of a piece of writing. But we actually never had a single person who was the narrative director for the game. So there was not one person that actually wrote the story. Instead, we hired somewhere around 20 different writers, and they're all people from all walks of life, people who are Native American, people who are Asian American immigrants like myself, people who are European immigrants, people who are Black and were former descendants of slaves, and basically we hired all sorts of people from all walks of life here in America and had them write stories based on their own families, based on what they grew up with, based on what they see their friends grow up with, and then put those stories and just kind of laced it around the world. So what ended up happening is that you get this group of stories that were essentially what defined what America actually is. And in the art, and all of the art, we took old photos from the archives, the black and white photos, and kind of painted reimaginations based on those photos, and had the writers kind of create a new story around that. And there's also this idea of basically just telling stories from the artist, from the writer, from the person who found the photo. All of these people would kind of work together to create this chain of the telling of stories. And basically combinations of hundreds of these American stories ended up creating what America is, because ultimately we're just a giant collection of real people's stories, right? So that's one game that we created many years ago, just in a way that we wanted to kind of show the world in an artistic way what America is in a very nitty-gritty way, and how you can kind of see the world through the lens of real day-to-day Americans.
So with that, I mean, that complexity blows my mind, right? Of what you're just sharing and how that goes through. Can you walk me through the process of how a game is created? Like two sections. One, how do you or your team come about the process of storyboarding, or whatever you would call it, right? Brainstorming, brain dumping, mind mapping, whatever mode you use. Where does it come from? How does it work to that point? And then how long does it take for a game to go from concept to being available for public consumption?
I mean, the question, it depends. I guess is the short answer for everything. I mean, the idea itself could come from a variety of things. There's basically in the game space, there are usually two main schools of thought in how original ideas come from. They could either come from like a specific story or narrative idea. You wanted to tell this particular story, and then you create a game, design some mechanics around it. Maybe you walk around, maybe you look at documents, maybe you don't walk around, maybe you just look at like a side view, kind of like Mario or the old school Mario games or something, right? You kind of create a mechanic based on the kind of story you want to tell. And then the other school of thought is really the opposite, which is there's a specific mechanic that you want to explore. Oh, I just want to make a game where you have a jetpack, and this jetpack is really cool, and you get to like write it, whatever. And that sounds fun. And then I'm gonna try to write a story to make that jetpack story make sense, I guess. So then you kind of focus on the mechanics. So it's usually one of those two trains of thoughts. For us, obviously, we're always going to be focusing on the narrative because it's about the human experience. It's about what you're taking away from the game. So we always start with what do we want this game to do on a very fundamentally emotional and kind of impactful level. And once we think about that, once we make a decision on like, okay, we want players to really kind of rethink, LGBT rights, or like maybe think about whether or not, like body implants is going to hurt society in the far future, or like random stuff like that. We think of something that someone really deeply cares about, and we want to turn that into like a full-fledged adventure. And then once that happens, we kind of build a world, build the mechanics, build the systems kind of around it. And I'm obviously very going very high level with a lot of that, and each of those are weeks and months of conversations among many people, but that's usually how it works. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of our approach. And in terms of timing, honestly, I think the shortest game that we've ever made, probably around 8 months from beginning to finish before we started selling it on the market. The longest game we've done, I think we're 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the longest one that we've done. So yeah, I mean, it could range all over the place. I mean, how some could just never even come out. Some could be in development for 15 years and then eventually come out, and it's terrible because it changed hands so many times. So there's a lot of variety for sure.
Does technology play a big part of that, Z? I mentioned this in kind of tongue-in-cheek a little earlier, but I remember breakout game. I remember, I'm 55 years old now, and I remember when Atari came out and Pong, where just, boop, boop, the thing would go back and you try to do that. It was pre-breakout, you know what I mean? Pong just trying to get it past the other guy would go faster and faster. And then, Asteroids and Defender, and these were my classic games that I played from Atari all the way through into onto the big machines, right up into college. And then my gaming stuff kind of I transitioned out for whatever reason. But now the technology seems absolutely insane. I'm sure from your perspective, is it hard to keep up with the way technology is changing to make the experience, the video game experience, as authentic as possible? I don't know if you guys are using the goggles that bring you into 3D, and like, it just seems to me that it's incredibly challenging and time consuming even to keep up with the latest technology to make your games work.
Yeah, I mean, the technology is hard, but it's also kind of why we do what we do. The way that I personally look at technology has always been colored by this really interesting quote from kind of the founders of Wells Fargo, actually, back when I was in my banking days, which is the idea that technology should never be a goal of your business, but rather a tool for you to use to achieve your goals. I think there's a lot of people, especially in the video game space, where VR goggles came out, the new Oculus Rift or Meta Quest or whatever, the new, Microsoft AR, the HoloLens, the Magic Leap comes out, all these cool things. In recent days, you see your talks about blockchain tech and NFTs. You talk about AI generation. I mean, there's a lot of this technology that's always coming and going. And some stay with us, like, for example, the free-to-play technology for mobile. That was something in the beginning where people were saying, oh, it's just a fad, free-to-play is not going to be here. But then every game became free, and then everyone's now just playing free games, but doing microtransactions to buy goods inside the game. So some technologies do stay, and then some technologies obviously don't stay. And I think the way that I look at it is always, is this particular piece of technology actually useful in achieving our company vision? The Serenity Forge vision is to create meaningful and emotionally impactful games that challenge the way you think. Would something like a VR goggle that you put on actually help achieve that goal? And if the answer is no, then we would not be engaging with it. I mean, in practice, what happens is, our vision, part of our vision is really to make sure that our games are very deeply kind of dense games are able to be consumed by a large audience around the world. We look at platforms like a mobile platform, like an iPhone. Like, should we release games on the iPhone? Well, yeah, everyone around the world has a smart device. It's a lot easier for for that to reach more audiences than trying to require people to have computers or a Nintendo Switch or PlayStation or something. So sure, that does make sense. But at the flip side, it's really hard for us to make very dense and narrative and story kind of immersive experiences for a phone. So a lot of times we don't really engage with mobile devices. And then on the other side, when you look at these goggles with huge room setups and cameras and all that stuff, well, yeah, that's very immersive. You feel like you teleported into another world. You're literally there and you're touching things. But it also costs you $2,000 to set that up. You need a really safe environment for people to use it, and it has a huge barrier of entry. It's very prohibitive. So no, we don't really engage with that either, because it's on the opposite end of the spectrum. We're not able to deliver our very immersive experience to as many people out there in the world. So ultimately, we find ourselves kind of in this middle ground where we work a lot with a lot of PC, Nintendo, PlayStation, kind of your typical video game platforms. But also at the same time, it doesn't really stop us from looking at new platforms that are in the same way. We constantly look for what's the highest reach, but still the highest kind of immersion at the same time.
Do you guys as a company, or you as the founder, CEO of what you're doing, do you try to project out what those technologies might be into the future, so that you're kind of, for lack of a better term, tasting what some of those things are, so that when they become mainstream, you've already not dove in 100%, but you've got just enough knowledge to go, like, can you foresee the future of what gaming could be? And would you share your thoughts on that with me?
Yeah, this is again kind of a personal thing for me. So I'm gonna share a random anecdote here. But basically, there's a Chinese conglomerate tech conglomerate called Xiaomi, which is kind of like a phone maker in China. They do a lot of appliances and stuff. The CEO of Xiaomi once said a really interesting quote that I kind of live by, which is, the moment that you stop changing is when you start getting old. And I think that's a really interesting thing to look at, because I mean, it's true, but also a lot of times I don't think it's really like by choice. I think it's kind of physically we just really feel that as we get older. So I think for me, when I think about things, I just don't want to get old. I want to keep on being here. I want to keep on going out there and doing things. I'm a very curious person. I want to learn more. So whenever new trends crop up, I always do my best to try to learn it as much as possible. When the NFT thing started happening, I started registering online, trying to find software to learn it, registered my OpenSea account, released some NFTs myself to see how the market works. And then after I learned it, I was like, this is not really a fit for what we're doing in the company. Now I know, great, I can move on to the next thing. The AI thing is happening right now, and I'm exploring with that. I'm using it every day to see how it feels like, but also it's very limited in a lot of ways. It's very early, and probably it's not really useful yet. Maybe it will be down the road. So we'll keep an eye on it and continue to use what we have. So ultimately, I think for me, I just am curious, and I want to keep on exploring these new things as they come up, because I'm someone who finds fascination in it. I do think that at some point in my life, maybe my brain isn't as ready to handle all of that. I already feel it every day, even though I'm still pretty young. But so overall, I think I'll keep on doing what I can, and my hope is that when the time does come that things have to change, that there'll be other people to kind of fill in the blanks when I need to.
That's beautiful. What was that movie? Wasn't there was a movie about this that would like say how far things could go? I think it was called Ready Player One or Ready Player Two or something like that. And I remember watching it going, holy cow, I wonder if this kind of thing is actually, how close to that could we get? So when I was kind of formulating that last question in my mind, that movie and that concept was in my head of like, could it get to that intrinsically tied to our cellular level, right? Where we're feeling it and we're seeing that. So that was kind of the background of that question. That do you guys ever, as a group of game developers, as an industry, do you ever wonder about or get concerned about the deep integration that people get with these things neurologically and physically, biochemically, to where it could create issues to them, to the quote unquote real world when they leave the game? Is that something that you guys consider as an industry, or you as a company? And how do you go about trying to stem what could be a negative consequence?
Yeah, I mean, I think in order to answer that question, we first have to take a step back and think about, what do you mean by the real world, right? I mean, we are talking on a screen, right? A kid who grows up, with only screens in their lives, would they be able to be okay in the real world, meeting with people, with seeing each other face to face? Well, actually, we just meet each other in screens anyway, right? It's the same argument that your teacher is saying, oh, you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket, so you have to memorize the multiplication tables. Well, actually, we do have calculators in our pockets, so we didn't really need that. I mean, all the way dating back to, looking at very primitive, well, not very primitive, but primitive enough technologies, things like wearing glasses. How, if someone is so used to wearing glasses, how would they be able to go out there and function in the real world, with people who don't wear glasses? Well, no, actually, we just kind of get used to it, right? So I think a lot of this is obviously, speculative, and a lot of it is also just our abilities to kind of adapt to what the world is. The world today, that, what we see, of the world today, is probably completely unrecognizable for a caveman, because the caveman would not know what the hell is going on with all these screens and plastics and drywalls and
planes
cement
flying overhead.
Yeah, exactly. None of this makes any sense to him. And he might say, oh, I don't want my kids to grow up in that kind of a world, because I mean, how can you be a real human being if you can't even hunt your own deer, right? Like, with your bare hands. So, ultimately, I think, looking down the road in 5,000 years, down the road, whatever, who knows what's actually going to be our future. And I think a lot of times maybe it's less important about worrying what the real world is for the next generation, because what we think the real world is really just limited in the small time slot that we grew up in. That's all.
I like it. I like that. That gives me a fresh perspective on, it's like the get off my lawn guy, right? Like, hey, you kids, you get off my lawn. You can't be killing the grass. And hearing you say that we're all adapting as we go. There will always be a sector of society that doesn't ever want to put anything in their hands, on their eyes, no screens. And then there will always be a group that is saying, hey, this is my primary form of function and communication and moving throughout the world. And then a lot of people will be in between that. So it's this inclusion space, a place for everybody, that I think I'm hearing you get, and an open-mindedness to where the future might take us.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at life, really, this kind of touches a little bit back on what I talked about earlier. But when you look at life, a lot of what we care about as humans, it's like, do we have enough to eat? Do we have enough money? Can we survive? And then it's like, okay, can I pursue my passions? Can I do the thing that I want to do? I want to be Jeff Bezos. I want to be the richest person in the world. I want to, have Lamborghinis and giant mansions and vacation in Maui whenever I feel like, and own an island in the Bahamas or whatever. There's a lot of ambitions that are really high up there. A few years ago, I read this book. It's a sci-fi book. It's called the Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect, and which is a kooky book. It never got published. It's a self-published book. It was really crazy. But one of the things about the book is that it put you in a world where it's the far, far future, where humans no longer actually exist in the current form, and basically computers in the physical world took real world and shoved it into a simulation, and your consciousness is now just fully simulated, and the real world doesn't exist anymore. It's just a earth covered in machines computing this world. And basically, in this new world, digital world, everyone has perfect power to do whatever you want, because, like, why bother, right? Like, why work when you can just say, hey, AI, give me $1 million and it'll just do it for you. So then people would, start injecting, because, you have your brain sensor, you start injecting, drugs into your brain and make you feel hallucinations and feel happy with no consequence, because there's no health consequence. You just go back to normal health. You could play out all sorts of crazy fantasies at no consequence. Murderers can go around and murder people just for fun, and have no consequence, because no one can actually get hurt. And in this world where everyone can do literally anything you can possibly imagine, life becomes completely pointless. And no one wants to be alive anymore, because what's the point? You're just going to be stuck here for next millions and millions of years permanently. What's the point of staying alive? Because there's nowhere to go. You're just, eventually everything gets dull, and it becomes pointless. So, a lot of times I kind of think about that book in that sense, and just thinking about we as humanity keeps on trying to achieve this ultimate goal of bringing resource to everybody and everyone being happy and everyone can do whatever they want. But actually what's at the end of this road is that everyone loses their meaning to life. And is that really, something that we should really, really sought after, or should we be more open-minded about, how things really turn out and just kind of let it flow, right? So anyway, I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question, but I just kind of wanted to bring it up regarding kind of how I see a lot of this fascination about oh, we gotta go, we gotta advance. Maybe a lot of times, the journey is the whole point.
What a great point. The journey is the point. And so let me ask you this. How deep are you now in playing video games? Now that you do it for a living, is it like the chef that doesn't like to cook at home, or that kind of thing? Or is it still passion? And if so, what's your favorite video game?
Yeah, I mean, I think I played somewhere around 560 games last year. I always make sure that I play a very healthy, well, it's not super healthy, I guess. Okay, to be fair, it's not really for fun, I'll be honest. I mean, a lot of it is that you just have to kind of go out there, see what's new, understand the market. I also judge a lot of award shows. So, if they send you 50 games and you have to pick the best one to give an award to, I feel bad for not playing it. A lot of people actually don't. So basically, yes, I do play a lot of games. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, the games that I care about the most are the ones that kind of create meaningful impact in me and still kind of teach me as a human being, still kind of shows me parts of the world that I'm not really familiar with. Games, I mean, I'm gonna name a couple that I'm sure you haven't heard of, but I'm also even sure that people in the audience probably haven't even heard of. Games like Citizen Sleeper, or I Was a Teenage Exocolonist, or Immortality. These games that kind of came out last year that really kind of pushes what our understanding of storytelling can be, or teach us to see the world in a totally different perspective. One of the games that we launched recently, called Lisa, is a game about sexual abuse. It's a game about a world filled with men where women have disappeared. What does that do to the only little girl that remains in this world? And it's a game about trauma. It's a game about family abuse. It's a game about just this nasty world that you have to navigate through. And you learn about humanity. You learn about how in some ways it's not super different from the world we currently live in, and kind of really reshape the views that you have for the kind of maybe a more nuanced perspective on society. So really those are the types of games that I personally care about, and I want to be able to kind of essentially keep on pushing the envelope, keep on pushing society just a tiny bit forward with each of the games that we do, and and hopefully help other people kind of do the same.
When it comes to Z, your game development philosophy, you just mentioned Lisa and how that game, the thought process behind it, is the object in your mind of a game. When we think of games, we think of fun, we think of enjoyment, right? And what I just heard you describe with Lisa is anything but fun for Lisa. And so is the goal in a game like that for Lisa to become a badass and be able to find her way and change the world around her so that she makes the world a better place? Or is that the end result of most games in your mind should be a good outcome? Or some of them, like you said earlier, man, you're a homeless person and everybody dies because of I mean, we're all gonna die, but everyone dies penniless and homeless and, you know, mugged or beat up or whatever. Is there points from your perspective in that go, hey, listen, I want to show the darker side of things so that people feel that and hopefully behave differently outside of their home? Or is your mission more to go, yeah, I want to try to make these things, these dark issues, find lightness and brightness at the end by the metamorphosis of change?
So I think, you know, as a creator, a lot of times, I mean, no one wants to create a video game. I mean, some people do maybe, but most people don't want to create a video game where it just tells people to take their own lives, right? Like that's not the point of what we do. What we do is more so to show people maybe the invisibility of depression, and how dangerous it could be and how it could sneak up on you, right? So I think a lot of times when we look at our games, it might be that the game kind of comes over here, stabs you in the heart, and just lets you bleed out in a corner. And that's kind of a lot of what our games do to you, you know, metaphorically.
Yes.
But also, I think in a way, this is kind of just how art is. If you think about books, you know, not every book has a happy ending. If you think about movies, not every movie is just a really fun adventure and then at the end everyone's happy. Not every movie is a Disney film, I suppose. So, you know, at the end of the day, not every video game is the same either. And I think sometimes it's actually more important for us to look at these stories and realize, and kind of see them as a mirror, kind of see them as a reflection of who we are, and challenge the way that we think about ourselves, about each other, and about our society. So that's really kind of the point of Serenity Forge. And, you know, we have games that are happy, you know, but I think it's the ones that are a little bit more potent are the ones that actually change the world a little bit for the little bit better.
Thank you for sharing that, Z. That's really great. That's kind of great filler for me to understand this concept a little bit, because again, you know, from my era of gaming, it was so much simpler, whether I was trying to rescue people off the planet from Defender or blowing up asteroids. You know, there's just a different mentality, and this has been so interesting to me. I want to ask you one more question, and it is this. Has there been a piece of advice that you've learned or been given along the way that has really helped shape you professionally and personally that you'd be willing to share with our audience so that we could look at taking that and putting it into our fabric as well?
So I think this answer is probably a little bit more aimed towards, you know, the specific demographic of people who can afford a computer or smart device to listen to a podcast from you know, the internet, living probably in America and speaking fluent English, right? So, you know, just thinking about this, going back to kind of what I talked about earlier, you know, it's really important, I think, for people to take time out of their days to realize what you have and appreciate what you have, and not just stop there and start utilizing what you have, and actually take advantage of what you actually have. When I was graduating college, I was pretty poor, you know, like I'm from a low income family, and my dad is blind and my mom doesn't speak English. And I, you know, thought to myself, and, you know, what do I do as a career? Should I be going out there getting some random investment banking job and just you know, survive? Or should I take advice from Ben Bernanke and go out there and do something I'm passionate for? And I thought to myself, and I looked at who I really was. I mean, I speak English and I can see, and that's already way better than what my parents had to go through to just get to where they are today. You know, worst case scenario, I go around, dick around for 10 years and end up, you know, not being able to get anywhere. And still I can go find a job at McDonald's and probably still put a roof over my head, because I live in America. I'm already living way better than somewhere in rural China where people just cannot afford to do that. So I thought to myself, might as well take a chance. So I went ahead and did it. And I think it's just important to realize that you actually do have a lot, and you have a lot of tools in your arsenal for you to use to, you know, kind of go out there and do the things that actually motivate you. And you know, I use this a lot, which is it's because I'm in the game industry. But the person who invented Mario, which is very popular video game character, Shigeru Miyamoto, he met the owner of Nintendo, Yamauchi, when he was 31 years old. And he didn't even work at Nintendo until then. He was just doing some random stuff. And then he got together and he's like, okay, let me create a video game character, I guess. And he made Mario. And now he's the grandfather of the entire industry. And he's still, and he only started at the age of 31. So I think it's really important to realize. And by the way, Yamauchi was 50 when that happened.
Wow.
The owner of Nintendo didn't even meet the person who invented Mario until he was 50 years old. It just really goes to show just how much time you actually have in life to, quote unquote, dick around, like I said earlier, to still achieve something of just absolute tremendous value for the rest of the time. So yeah, I guess my advice would just be to utilize what you have. Take a closer look at who you are, and don't be afraid to go out there and actually just use it to do the thing that you want to do.
Thank you for sharing that and all this wisdom. I do have to get this out though, Z. If people want to pick up your game, they want to learn more about you, your company, how do they go about connecting with you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to find our company would just be through our website, serenityforge.com. We're also on social media at Serenity Forge typically. And if anyone wants to connect with me directly, I'm on Twitter or X, whatever they call it now, at Zhenghua Yang, so my full name. And then also I'm pretty searchable on LinkedIn if you just Google my full name.
Awesome. Well, Z Yang, I consider you a great interview, my friend, and your spirit is contagious to me. Thank you for what you're putting out into the world and for doing it with a conscience, trying to make things better for all of us from the talent and the beautiful art that you have. And just always know that you have a friend here at Ramos Law.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. And for those of you watching and listening, I hope this inspired you to follow your dreams, follow your passion, be grateful, look at your resources, and know that it's never too late. So you too can get out there and make a difference.